Hey there, everybody. This is Bill McDonald, the writing doctor with May the Fives be with you. If you're in Texas, we used to call ourselves May the Fours be with you. But now that we're trying to get two different people to give us a five on the extended essay response, then I feel like I had to change myself to May the Fives be with you. Now, five is just an arbitrary number, the best score. So if you're teaching expository, informative text, informative writing in the structure of an expository where you're explaining, regardless of the point system, explaining is explaining. The purpose of writing is to explain, inform the reader by explaining a point. So I'm going to be doing part 2, lesson 1 today on revising. So if I hold my finger under one eye and the other eye, revising is saying I'm going to view something, and if I review something, if I revise it, it means that I'm going to look at it differently right now than I will later. So there are these candies that they sell called now and laters. So revision is taking something in terms of content, the organization, and the development of something. Let me make sure my D is right here. The development of something and improving that content by using the acronym ARM. So if your hand is the passage, the selection, that means it could be the introduction, the body, and the conclusion of the passage, the selection, the poem, the play, whatever piece of writing that you're looking at. When you take the arm, you're going beyond just understanding the content, and you're improving it by doing an acronym that we're going to call ARM singular. So let's say that this is just one paragraph. Well, then the thumb would be called the topic sentence, the main idea, same thing. So any question about an entire passage where you're adding or removing or replacing or moving a sentence for a whole selection, a whole poem, a play, fictional piece, whatever that selection is or that passage is, if you're having to add one for the whole passage, that because my hand is higher than my arm in this case, I would suggest you do the armed questions first in terms of scaffolding. And that's what we'll talk about in today's introductory lesson of revising, part 1, just introduction. So if this is the topic sentence, it's also called the main idea of a paragraph. And that means that all these other sentences would be the specific supporting sentences, and then the closing sentence that either closes the paragraph or closes the entire passage. We'll call it the pinky sentence. It's supposed to wrap everything up. So if you say, oh, I have him wrapped around my finger, well, if you tie everything together in a paragraph, it would be like the ending sentence of a paragraph. If you tie everything together in a passage, then it would be the conclusion, the last paragraph, not necessarily the last indentation, because in poems and in plays, they have a different way of moving the words and sentences around. So when you're only working on passages in Texas, the most they're ever going to ask you to arm, to add, remove, replace, or move is one sentence for 2 different passages. So they might give your students, I'm guessing, 3 sentences to add, remove, or words with a W in my hand, or a phrase, or a transition, or combining. And so when we look at the graphic organizer, you're going to see that I have it scaffolded in a way so you can go from just adding, removing, replacing, or moving one word, all the way to adding, replacing, or moving one sentence inside a paragraph, or adding a topic sentence, inserting a sentence into the paragraph and deciding where it goes inside a paragraph. So let me show you using your advanced folders first. So you'll need the advanced folders for this. You'll need your revising, improving the IBC, the root beer bottle, with all of the, I believe it's 17 different keyword strands of revising that you'll see in revising questions in Texas, and those are just sort of in random order. Then I'll use the folder, the READ-VISING graphic organizer, to help you see the scaffolding that I'm going to recommend, the way that I'm going to teach revising in terms of the order for kids who struggle with reading. Because yes, you're going to have some students that could read an entire passage, they can read an entire novel, have complete understanding, and they could even find mistakes that adults make. They'll find mistakes that kids older than them will make. And that's what revising is, looking at content that has problems in terms of its organizational structure or its development. And they'll either change the order, the organization, or the development around. So let's take a look at the folder first, so you can see that I've got the acronym for revising passages on that lower right hand top portion. When you're working on revising a passage, singular, you're only going to add is green. So I would suggest you think, okay, I'm going to add, that's green. The most I'm going to add is one sentence to something that's already there. They might say, R, remove something. You're either going to remove something because it doesn't belong there, or because you're going to replace it with something that's better. And once again, the most you're ever going to add, remove, or replace is one sentence, or in the case of replacing, the second green there, one sentence with a better one, the best one that would fit. The M of ARM is to move, which means don't take anything out, don't change the content, just move the order of the content around. So again, you'll see it here underneath. What are we moving around? Well, we're either going to move a box sentence to some place inside a paragraph, or we'll add, remove, replace, or move a word, a phrase, a transition, a sentence. We'll combine sentences. Here'll be a sentence here, and here'll be another sentence. If we say 16 and 17, they'll say, what's the best way to combine sentences 16 and 17? Well, all we're doing is moving them so that they're together. We're not adding anything except a couple of words that allow us to transition from sentence 16, what you might call the teeter by now, to sentence 17, which would be the totter, okay? And all you're adding is something to the introduction, the beginning, to the body, middle, or the conclusion, the ending. And I would suggest, if you can have access to it, get a bottle of IBC root beer and have that somewhere in the classroom, because regardless of what type of genre we're reading, what type of purpose of writing it is, when you're revising the content, you're improving it by putting something in to the introduction, body, conclusion, moving something around, or taking something out. And once again, revising is improving the development and organization, compared to up here, editing only improving the grammar / conventions of something. So if your kids struggle with reading, sometimes they might have to use their arm to play actors, remember more, sequence. In other words, the order of things. If I act out the sequence of those sentences or that paragraph that they're asking me about, I might be able to figure out what I'm supposed to be adding that would make more sense, what I'm supposed to remove that didn't make sense, or maybe replace with something better or move something around. Another arm that you can use is artists. Remember more, setting, what is sometimes called right below it, the senses. So I want to, if you're trying to paint a picture in my mind with what you're reading to me, I want to be able to get a sense of what you're telling me based on drawing a little picture. So I want you to notice that in Texas, at least, the word substitute is not there. A substitute is somebody who takes your place if you can't be in the classroom that day. I have not seen the word substitute on a revising test in the last 18 years in Texas. That was an actual Texas real test, not some book that you got that was trying to imitate a Texas test. So what they say is what could best replace. So what you're doing is using that red monkey to remove some content, and then using the green monkey to replace it with something that's a little bit better, that's taking maybe something out that's vague and replacing it with something that's more specific in terms of the content. That's usually the reason why you're removing and replacing something. So keep in mind, if you're going to make an anchor chart, which will be today's challenge, make sure it says arm singular, not arms plural. And I would love to see those three colors, green, red, and yellow. And if you want, you can also add on the opposite side or somewhere along the sides, actors, remember more, sequence, in other words, the order of things that happen, or artists, remember more, setting, or the 5 senses. So let's take a look at the revising chart that I gave you a class set of, most of you. It's got all the things that we just said, but in a bigger format where you can laminate this and your kids can use it as a guide. Okay, I'm doing revising, I'm improving the content of the beginning, middle, or the end. And when you flip it over the last 20, or maybe I've been doing the consulting for 18, 19 years and teaching for 12 in the classroom myself. So that's over 30 years where I've kind of looked and seen every single type of keyword strand that they can give your students. And these are the ones that I've seen so far over the years. So if you can get used to asking these questions with your students when they're writing their short answer responses and their extended essay responses, whenever you begin that, it's going to be a lot easier for them to understand what you mean in a passage that says, for example, look at number 13, which sentences, and the only reason I have sentences is if you're going to go ahead and be doing revising of an essay or a short answer question, a constructed short answer response, then sometimes if you are just missing, if you have the answer, that would be the red light. But if you didn't bother to tell me where do you go to find the answer, what stanza, what sentence, what paragraph, what scene, what section, then you have to say, okay, in order to get a 2, I've got to tell you what's the answer, where you might go, and the evidence that is in that place that you're going to tell me. So you're going to think of adding, removing, and replacing as red lights and yellow lights now. So I'm just basically getting 2 steps ahead. In part 4, we're going to talk about how we need to add, remove. No, now we're talking about adding the answer to the question that's asked. So you have to think first, well, what is the question? Because in order to answer the question, red light, I need the other red light. So if you think of 2 eyes, you're going to see 2 sentences. Okay. One will be the question with a question mark in the form of a sentence. They're going to ask your kids an open-ended question, and your kids will have to say their answer. In the short answer, it's just answering the question in a complete sentence. It starts with a capital, has decent subject-verb agreement, and ends with a punctuation. Then in order to get a 2, they'll have to add where inside the selection that you can prove your answer, where is your evidence, and then in order to complete the 2, so red is how to get a 1 and yellow is how to get a 2. So think of this, W, W, E. What's the answer? Where can I find it? And what evidence can I use? And if your students can do that by adding these 3 things, they won't just get a 1 for answering the question. They'll probably get a 2 because they're telling you the location in the passage and the evidence that they plan on using. So I call that the WWE of expository and short answer. And then all we got to do to turn it green is to explain. So if your kids are asked to do an extended essay response for reading or any other subject, then you actually have to explain your evidence, give examples, and express yourself fully. And the older the student, the more sentences that you would want them to add in terms of quantity and quality. So the problem with the keywords strands chart is that they're random, like I mentioned. So what I recommend is that we go to the READ-VISING graphic organizer, and instead of starting at the top where we take a whole box sentence or box question and place it somewhere in a paragraph, or instead of asking for the central idea or the controlling idea or a thesis or a position, which is the focus of an entire passage, that or a topic sentence, a main idea that an entire paragraph is about, we need to come down to the arm where it's got sort of like a ladder of scaffolding, where the first questions that you'll answer, if you're teaching revising in a structured way, is the kids in the lower grades are going to write a sentence, and all your kids are going to do is work on one word. What word could I replace? Because the word is too vague that's there, and I'm going to replace it with something that's more specific. So they can either look at it in context and then think in their brain, or they can use a book, the online or paper dictionary, to find out the definition of that word, to find out which one is more specific that doesn't change the meaning or the content. Then you'll say, oh, what is the best revision in sentence blank? That's only changing the order of words. So you're not changing anything around. The content stays the same. It's just like saying, I need these puzzle pieces to be in a certain order without losing the pieces, the content, the meaning, just putting the sentence in an order that makes the most sense, because the structure is not correct. And I call that around the words in 80 ways. And there's not really 80 ways you can put the words, but I just thought it was a creative way to do it. Then the next easy one is to say, I'm not going to add anything to the sentences they're asking me to combine. All I'm going to do is play that game that's called Come Together Right Now. So if you say this is sentence 4, then they're going to have sentence 5 over here, and you write down the main content of sentence 4 and 5, and then you join them together using some form of coordinating conjunction or some way that uses a comma or commas in a series, or if upper grades, it might be a colon or a semicolon. They're just going to bring the sentences together. Sometimes they're going to add sentences that will create an effect or a cause for an effect, an action for a reaction, resolution for a conflict. In reading, we'll worry about this later. Paired passages, this is going to be for reading, where you're kind of comparing across passages the content. How are they the same green, or how are they different? How do they contrast yellow in terms of a sentence inside that passage and a sentence inside the other passage, or a paragraph inside that passage and a paragraph inside the other passage. Then the next step on the ladder would be, I have a paragraph, and all I have to do is just add, insert, replace, put one in, remove, delete, or take one out, or move, put something, a whole sentence before or after something else. And so if your kids will put the hashtags or the keywords, then they'll kind of be able to know, okay, if this sentence is supposed to go somewhere, I've got to figure out what the sentences are around it so that I can put it in the right spot. And that doing that is similar to what you have up here, where you say, here's a box and here's an entire paragraph with sentence 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And you could put, after you laminate these, you could put the numbers in there. If you've got a couple more sentences, then you could just draw a few more fingers. And I'll be showing you, this is just the introduction of revision. So if you have 6 sentences, then you could say it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And if all you're doing is saying, add the box sentence, then where are they telling you to add it? Then you could put A, B, C, and D, or they might say put it at the beginning. A, B, maybe C over here, and D over here. Just place the letters wherever they tell you, and all you're doing, again, is yellow, moving the box sentence from where it is in the questions to a certain place inside the paragraph, either before or after a sentence. And again, the reason I saved all of these in the center, if it's a question talking about an entire paragraph, a topic sentence, or a main idea, or a central idea, the focus of a story, a controlling idea, the thesis of a passage, a position of a persuasive. If they're asking your students to add a sentence that's about the entire passage, those questions are the most difficult, the most rigorous. Those are the ones your students should do last, because they have to have a comprehension of the entire piece. And so I'm going to be showing you, when we get to those difficult questions, how to break down a passage into 4, 5, or 6 parts, so that we can hashtag or assign keywords. What's the main ideas of these sections? Sometimes the main ideas are labeled by sections. They actually have titles, and sometimes they don't. So we'll have to give main ideas so that we can figure out, okay, if this is what the 4, 5, or 6 colors represent, then which one is the best central idea that all of them are about? In other words, a little bit of each color. So we would be assigning our 6 colors or 5 colors of the monkeys. Remember, we have red, yellow, green, blue, orange, and purple. So I'm going to be showing you how to divide any selection or passage into 6 sections that make the most sense, and put them by boxes, if you want to call it that. If I box in this section, and what would I call that? And again, because those questions are the most difficult, I would suggest you do the position, as you can see here, sentence last, the thesis questions. The theme is a reading question. If you're adding a topic sentence, it means, what is the main idea of a paragraph? What is that paragraph mostly or mainly about? Well, if they don't have that in revising, they're saying it's not there. So you have to actually either remove the one that's there because the topic sentence main idea is too vague. So you replace it, and then you remove it and replace it with one that's more specific, that's actually the main idea of that paragraph. So if you check data from all of the last years, the questions that score the lowest are always the questions that ask your students to add, remove, replace, or move a sentence in relationship to a whole paragraph, or the whole passage, the whole selection, the whole poem, the whole play, the whole story. So save those for last, because it's better to start at the bottom of the ladder, the bottom of the arm, and then work your way up, because that's what will help your kids who struggle with reading. Because if you took the time to purchase this CREST online training, what it tells me is that whatever you're using right now wasn't enough on its own to help the students who are struggling. So basically, we're hoping that together you and I can work on filling in those gaps that our current curriculum or program or our current content has, so that I can help you. And hopefully you've been watching. I'm going to keep doing this all summer. I'm going to be taking the questions that did the poorest in reading from 3rd all the way to 10th grade and using the materials that I sent you to help your students do a better job understanding the content so they'll be able to have a better time answering questions that you're going to be noticing when I send you. It'll instead of saying CREST uh, part 2, 3, 4, or 5, it'll say bonus, and then I'll make sure I tell you what grade level it is and what the skill it is that's practicing. Because sometimes just because a skill is a question is from a 5th grade test, it's something that would help 4th graders and 6th graders as well, because it could be a supporting standard for one grade or a readiness standard for another grade. So keep that in mind whenever you see me modeling the bonus questions, and those will be free for all of you. I'll be posting them on Facebook because I don't charge for content that's not mine. I'm just giving you ideas on maybe a different way to approach reading questions. So if it says bonus, those are going to be strategies, videos that I'm going to share with you on how to teach, how to differentiate your instruction with the reading questions that struggle at each grade level in terms of the most percentage of students getting those questions wrong. And it's not always about the student expectation. Sometimes it's just the way the question was worded, or perhaps the way that we taught the skill maybe wasn't enough to help the students attack the question in terms of the way the question was asked. So there you have it for lesson 1 of part 2 revising, just the introduction. So I'm going to take you each part, each lesson on revising will be on how to go about teaching your students modeling and mentoring, working their way up the arm from words to a phrase, to a line, to combining, to just adding a sentence, to transitioning between sentences by connecting 2 different ideas together. And then finally, the more difficult ones where we're adding something to a whole paragraph, to a whole selection, or we're adding a sentence to a whole passage or a whole poem or persuasive piece, informative piece. So thank you so much for your attention. Your challenge for today is to draw either an actual arm with the things that we've talked about, the colors red, yellow, and green, add, remove, replace, move, actors remember more sequence, artists remember more setting or senses, or you can do the root beer bottle and put the IBC, the introduction, body, conclusion. So that's what I encourage you to do as an anchor chart. Yes, you have a copy of it, but sometimes unless you do something yourself, just seeing a copy of something isn't always enough to help your kids. So that's my challenge. Either do the arm, the root beer bottle, or both on front and back. And anyone who does these things will get points for our challenges. And again, at the end of the part 2, I'll announce the winner of part 2. Amy Albus, I think is how you say her name. She won our part 1. So as I mentioned, if you're getting into the game late, you're watching this video a little bit later, if I'm already on part 3, 4, or 5, and you give me something for part 1 or part 2, you're going to get points. And so basically, whoever has the most points earned at any period in the middle of a part is going to earn points. And again, there's going to be lots of prizes at the end because there's a lot of you that joined this CREST online training. And one of you will win a free training, and that's over a $2,000 value, and it can be with your students while teachers observe at your campus or district, or it can be just a teacher training with your campus or district in reading/writing. So hope you enjoyed CREST Online Part 2, Revising, Lesson 1, Introduction. Take care and God bless.